I was still in the hospital when my children celebrated their early inheritance, selling everything from the TV to the beach house. But the shock came when the notary's office called to inform them the property has an owner and is not anyone in the family. I never thought that surviving surgery would be the thing that exposed my children for who they really were. I'd only been out of the ICU for a few hours when I overheard the nurse say, "Her kids have been in great spirits. They were just at the beach house, celebrating." I blinked hard, trying to make sense of it. Celebrating what? My recovery? No, of course not. The answer arrived with the buzz of a phone. Not mine, but hers. She stepped out to take the call, but not before I saw the preview flash across the screen. Brad, sold signs-up bottle with popping cork meat. I asked for my phone. My hands still shook from anesthesia, but I managed to pull up my messages. One from my old friend Shirley. A photo. Brad and Shannon smiling like hyenas in front of my beach house. Barbecue grill smoking. Lawn chairs full. A bright red "for sale" sign posted proudly in the sand. I stared at it. I don't know how long. My chest didn't hurt, but something deeper did. Something colder than any scalpel could reach. They'd counted me out. And they weren't even subtle about it. Just weeks ago, Brad had joked about early inheritance while helping himself to the liquor cabinet. Shannon, quiet as always, nodded with that small, obedient smile. I had laughed too, because I didn't want to believe what I saw in their eyes. Now, there was no need to pretend. I wasn't even out of the hospital, and they were already carving up my life, my legacy, like vultures over something warm. But what none of them knew, what they hadn't planned for, was the call I had made 2 months ago. The transfer, the trust, the one signature that changed everything. They thought they'd pulled off the perfect betrayal. But I wasn't dead, and this wasn't over. That night, the machines beeped their soft, steady rhythm. But my thoughts? They roared like thunder. I lay still, eyes open in the dark, tethered to IVs and machines, but feeling more awake, more alive than I had in years. They told the neighbors I was gone. They told the real estate agent I was no longer mentally fit. They told themselves that my absence gave them permission. Brad had always been bold, but this, selling my beach house while I was still in a hospital bed, that wasn't just callous, it was criminal. And Shannon, her silence hurt more than any knife. She was in my home, in my garden, pouring wine into glasses I'd polished for 20 years. Letting strangers trample across the floors, Harold and I laid ourselves, laughing like it was all owed to her, like I had lived just long enough to be useful, then conveniently disappeared. But I hadn't disappeared, not yet. They thought they'd finally crossed the finish line. In truth, they'd only set foot on a battlefield. Because here's what they didn't know, what they never bothered to ask. I'd seen this coming. Not this exact betrayal, no, but enough signs. Enough red flags tucked between casual cruelties and offhand remarks. "You're not getting any younger, Mom," Brad said last Thanksgiving, half joking as he scoped out my watch collection. "You shouldn't be living alone anymore," Shannon would offer sweetly, right before asking me to co-sign their second mortgage. I'd felt something shifting for years. They weren't waiting to take care of me. They were circling, calculating, smiling while checking the locks. So I made a vow in that bed, with an IV in my arm and bruises blooming across my hands. I whispered the words out loud. "You want early inheritance? Fine, you'll inherit what you deserve." Nothing. My heart rate stayed steady, but my purpose surged. I wasn't just going to protect what was mine. I was going to make sure they knew what it meant to lose me, truly, irrevocably, not as a mother, but as a bank account, as a shield, as the fool they thought I'd always be. They gambled everything on my death, but I was still here, and they were about to learn what it means to bet against a woman who's got nothing left to lose except patience. I used to think Brad's jokes were just poor taste, that dark humor ran in the family, that his jabs were harmless. I was wrong. Last Thanksgiving, I sat at the head of the table, still doing the hosting, still slicing the turkey, even though I was the oldest one in the room. Brad had shown up late, Shannon already buzzed on white wine, and within minutes they were joking about how the beach house would finally be put to good use once Mom croaked. He laughed, looked around the table. Nobody else did. And Shannon, she didn't stop him. She never does. She just smirked into her wine glass like it was easier to sip than speak. I let it slide. I always did. Because you don't want to believe your child is waiting for you to die. You want to believe they're overwhelmed, distracted, just bad with words. You don't want to believe that they're measuring your life in resale value. That house, Harold and I built it together. Every window, every tile, every stubborn nail, we chose it all. I still remember him laughing when he dropped a beam on his foot. I still remember hanging wind chimes with my bare hands while he painted the porch, humming off key. We built more than a house. We built us in there. And now? Brad was snapping selfies with a drink on our deck. Shannon was giving tours like she'd earned the right. And worst of all, I saw my granddaughter Elsie, 8 years old, twirling barefoot in the sand, with no idea the house she played in was stolen. That's what cracked me open. Because if Brad could do this to me, if Shannon could quietly agree, what kind of legacy was I leaving behind? What kind of example had I set? I thought I was showing them grace. I thought kindness would anchor them. But all I taught them was that I'd stay quiet while they took and took and took. Not anymore. Because the pain, the betrayal, the ache in my chest when I saw that for sale sign, it wasn't just from what they did. It was from realizing they'd always been this way. And now, they were going to learn something new. I may be old, but I am not fragile. I may love them, but I will not excuse them. And what they took without permission, they will return with interest. The doctor called it a miracle. Honestly, Helen, he said, checking my chart with a furrowed brow, we didn't expect this kind of bounce back. I just smiled, thin-lipped and tired. Not because I was weak, but because I knew what was waiting for me outside those walls. Brad hadn't visited since the surgery. Not once. Shannon? She sent flowers. Cheap ones. The kind you grab on sale at the grocery store. The card didn't even say my name. Just thinking of you, the family. No signature. They were already speaking of me in past tense, so when the nurse wheeled me into discharge and asked if anyone was picking me up, I said no. I made one phone call from the lobby. Not to Brad, not to Shannon. I called Howard, my attorney. He picked up on the second ring. Is the title transfer finalized? I asked. He paused, not because he was uncertain, but because he understood exactly why I was asking now. Yes, he said, as of last month, the beach house is no longer in your name. It's in the trust. I closed my eyes, exhaled. I had done it. Weeks ago. Quietly, preemptively. They thought they were ahead, but they were already too late. You're safe, Howard added, voice steady. They can't touch it now. Not legally. Safe. That word hit differently now. Because what I needed wasn't safety from death. I needed safety from my own blood. Brad must have thought he was brilliant, charming the neighbors, tricking the real estate agent, rehearsing his sob story about the dying mother who wanted them to have the place. Shannon probably nodded along in fake grief, slipping into my bedroom while the guests ate brisket on the patio. But there's something they hadn't counted on, something no greedy heir can prepare for. A mother who saw the knife coming and moved the damn target. They'd built their plan on the assumption I wouldn't live long enough to fight. But I did. And now I wasn't just alive, I was angry. I was ready. And I was legally untouchable. Let's see how charming Brad sounds in court when the sale he pushed through is exposed as fraud. Let's see how innocent Shannon looks when her social media posts show her touring a house she never owned. Let them laugh with their guests. Let them drink to my name. Because soon, very soon, they won't be toasting their inheritance. They'll be begging for leniency. 2 months before the hospital. That's when it started. I remember the day clearly. The sky was pale with early spring haze, and Evelyn was pruning her rose bushes with those little clippers she swore by. She was my best friend, had been for 30 years, never asked for anything, never lied, never once looked at me like a price tag. She was the only person I trusted enough to say the words out loud. "I think my son is planning to steal my house." Evelyn didn't gasp. She didn't clutch her pearls. She nodded once and said, "Then we need to move fast." By the end of that week, she was named the trustee, not because I was scared, but because I was done being naive. I'd seen the way Brad flinched when I mentioned updating my will. I'd seen how Shannon winced when I asked for help replacing the roof. They only smiled when I was useful. When I paid, when I gave, not once had either of them asked, "What do you want, Mom?" They didn't see me as a person anymore. I was an obstacle with a wallet, a stepping stone between them and their version of luxury. So I turned the game on them. I took the beach house, my checking account, my savings, the car title, every last piece of value, and transferred them into a living trust under Evelyn's management, not just for safekeeping, for strategy. And I told no one, not Brad, not Shannon, not even my neighbor Margaret, who gossips like it's a profession. Evelyn and I had copies of every page, sealed and notarized, in a fireproof box, in 2 locations. "Why a trust?" she'd asked. "Because," I said, "you can't steal what someone doesn't legally own anymore." And that's the truth. I hadn't just protected my assets. I'd made sure they never even had the right to try. So while they were planning their nursery, sketching out furniture layouts in my sunroom, and uploading Instagram reels captioned, "From tragedy to new beginnings," they didn't know the deed had already slipped from their grasp. They paraded around like victors, but the battlefield had no treasure left. And when they tried to cash the check they wrote with my life, it would bounce straight into a fraud investigation. They didn't just misjudge my love, they misjudged my spine. Brad always thought I was sentimental, that I'd never fight him because I once rocked him to sleep. But here's what he forgot. I didn't raise him to be a thief. And I don't care whose child you are. You steal from me, I will take back more than what you touched. I'll take your comfort, your credibility, your illusions of power. This trust wasn't just a legal maneuver. It was the first nail in their plan's coffin. And I was holding the hammer. Evelyn didn't cry when I told her. She sat there, hands folded over her gardening gloves, face pale but composed as I recounted it all. The photo, the for sale sign, the barbecue, the smug glint in Brad's eyes. "They really thought you were dying?" she asked. I nodded. "They hoped," I corrected. The silence that followed wasn't grief. It was mourning for the illusion I had clung to, for the years I spent believing that deep down, my children loved me more than they loved my property. Evelyn reached for the manila folder I had placed between us. Inside, notarized trust documents, bank statements, transfer confirmations, photos of everything that still belonged to me, legally, no matter what Brad and Shannon had tried to claim. "Let's go public," she said. "Let's shut it down now." I shook my head. "Not yet. Let them think they've won. Let them spend. Let them lie. Let them hang themselves with the rope they stole from me." And so, we documented everything. That afternoon, Evelyn helped me back to my feet. I was still healing, and we went room by room through my home. Or, what used to be my home. Because Brad had already begun the pillaging. The TV was gone. My jewelry box was empty. The heirloom quilt, the one my grandmother hand-stitched in 1912, was missing from the cedar chest. Even my wedding china boxed up, taken, and in its place, a single sheet of notebook paper, torn edges, Brad's handwriting. "Don't worry, Mom. We're just handling things early. Rest easy. B and S. Rest easy?" They were looting me before the grave was cold. That wasn't love. That wasn't grief. That was 2 leeches dressing up theft in the costume of caregiving. And Shannon? Don't think her silence saved her. She'd been the one cataloging items in my closet. I know her handwriting. Little tags with prices, sizes, labels, like I was a garage sale that forgot to die on schedule. We took photos of everything missing. Evelyn documented timestamps, locations, witnesses. I called Howard again. We started building the file, not just of fraud, but of intent. Because this wasn't just exploitation. This was premeditated theft, done by the very people who used to call me Mom, and when this case lands on the judge's desk, they won't just see a grieving family managing loose ends. They'll see what I see: two con artists with my blood in their veins and dollar signs in their eyes. I walked back into my house with the kind of stillness people mistake for calm. But I wasn't calm. I was calculating. You know the saying, a home should welcome you. Mine greeted me with silence, dust, and violation. The couch was gone, not sold, not moved, gone. My couch, where Harold and I used to fall asleep watching Jeopardy. The one with the little tea stain from the day my granddaughter first sat on my lap and tried to drink from my mug. Gone. They'd taken the TV, the stereo system, the rug beneath the coffee table. Shannon even had the gall to leave behind one of her nail tips on the mantel, like some grotesque calling card. In the kitchen, half my plates were missing, drawers half empty. They hadn't even bothered to close some of the cabinets, as if they'd already decided it wasn't mine anymore, just a shell they could scrape through. And on the fridge, a magnet with their smiling faces. A photo from some trip they took last year, paid for with my gift money. That's when the tears finally came. Not because they'd stolen my furniture, but because they looked happy doing it. They weren't mourning. They weren't struggling with grief. They were celebrating. They were nesting in my ruin. They were turning my life into a showroom, one they thought they could own. I wandered into the bedroom. Half the closet? Cleared. My shoes, even the orthopedic ones I wore after my hip replacement, gone. The dresser drawers were open. The silver bangles I kept from my 30th anniversary were nowhere to be found. I sat on the stripped mattress and stared at the cracked ceiling, listening to nothing but my own shallow breath, and then I stood up. I got my phone. And I took photos. Every empty drawer, every gap in the wall where art once hung, every tag Shannon left behind, stuck to the inside of my closet door. Mirror, minus $45. Antique frame, great condition. It wasn't just a robbery, it was a liquidation. I wasn't their mother anymore. I was merchandise. But what they didn't know, what they never even considered, was that each item missing was already protected, covered under the trust, tracked, tied to serial numbers, appraised, filed. I wasn't walking through a disaster scene. I was walking through a case folder, one that would soon land in front of a judge. And Brad, who always boasted about being smarter than the lawyers, he'd left fingerprints on every transaction, digital trails, bank transfers, emails from his work computer. I had it all. He thought he'd robbed me clean, but all he'd done was give me more ways to destroy him, legally, publicly, permanently. I thought I'd hit bottom when I saw my bedroom stripped bare. I thought grief had a limit, but I was wrong. Because what came next? That shattered something deeper than trust. I walked into the real estate office wearing the same sweater I'd had on when I left for the hospital. A nurse had folded it into a bag marked "Personal Belongings of Deceased Patient." Guess Brad gave them that label. The woman at the front desk smiled politely until I gave my name. Then she blinked. "Oh," she said. "We weren't expecting, your son said." She stopped herself, but I already knew. My son said I was dead, or close enough to it. Her cheeks flushed. She looked away. "He said you were incapacitated, that you wouldn't be returning." That word, incapacitated, clung to the walls of my chest like poison. I demanded to see the paperwork. She hesitated, then handed me a printed copy of the listing. The beach house, my beach house, was on the market. A buyer had already submitted an offer, and there it was. My name, my forged signature, signed in shaky imitation on a power of attorney document I never authorized, filed under the claim that I was mentally unfit to handle affairs. The same woman who once begged me for parenting advice now filed papers claiming I didn't know my own name. And Brad, the son I once held through measles and heartbreak and SAT panic, he stood in front of strangers and told them I was gone. Not just dying, not just old, gone. Mentally, legally, emotionally erased. And also he could sell the last piece of my soul for a quick cash out. I clenched the document so tightly my fingers ached. I wasn't sure whether I'd scream or throw up. "Your son said the house was his now," the agent added, too cheerfully. I turned to her slowly. My voice was low, calm, measured, like I used to speak to disobedient students before handing down a suspension. "My son can say what he wants, but that house has an owner, and it isn't him." I walked out, with the document folded in my purse. Another piece for the case. Another bullet in the chamber. Because now this wasn't just about betrayal. Now we were dealing with fraud, forgery, elder exploitation. He didn't just steal. He declared me incompetent. He stripped my name from my own life. He tried to bury me alive and write his name on the tombstone. But here's the truth Brad never understood. I don't go quietly. I rise. And when I do, I don't come back to make peace. I come back to bury the ones who dug my grave. Back at Evelyn's kitchen table, I laid out the forged documents like they were a murder weapon. Because in a way, they were. They didn't just try to steal my house. They tried to kill me on paper. "He filed these under your name?" Evelyn whispered, her voice shaking. "He buried me before the doctors could even close the stitches." I slid the copy of the forged power of attorney to Howard, my attorney, who arrived 10 minutes later. His face hardened as he read. "That's criminal, straight up, and provable." Provable. God, what a beautiful word. I wasn't just some pitiful old woman sobbing about betrayal. I was armed. We sent certified letters to the real estate agency, the title company, and the eager little buyers who probably thought they'd snagged a beach house at a, quote, grief discount. Each letter said the same thing, in very precise legal terms. The seller does not, and never did, have legal authority over this property. The deed was held in trust. The transfer was fraudulent. Withdraw now, or face litigation. We didn't wait long. 2 days later, Evelyn and I sat on her sun porch sipping iced tea when her phone buzzed. "You'll want to hear this," she said, handing it to me. The buyers had pulled out. The agent had pulled the listing. The sale had collapsed. My house was off the market. Mine. Still, legally, unshakably. I stared out at Evelyn's garden, at the hummingbird feeder and the blooming azaleas, and for the first time in weeks, I smiled. Not because I had won, but because they had lost. Brad, who had probably already promised the proceeds to his golf club buddies, was about to come up empty-handed. Shannon, who was probably dreaming of new curtains and Instagramming her dream home tour, now had nothing to redecorate. And more importantly, they had no idea how close the fire was to their feet. They still thought I was just healing. They still thought I was quiet. But I wasn't healing. I was sharpening. "That's one win," I said aloud. "Let's make the next one permanent." Howard nodded. "Next step's criminal court. We're not just undoing the damage. We're putting this on record." And that's when the scales tipped. This wasn't about keeping what was mine anymore. It was about taking back what they stole, piece by piece, dollar by dollar, dignity by dignity. They weren't getting away with it, not because I was smarter, not because I had better lawyers, but because I refused to die quietly in the story they wrote for me. They called it early inheritance. I was about to show them what that really meant. Everything they touched would rot in their hands. I rang the doorbell myself. Not the lawyers, not a courier, me. Shannon opened the door halfway, expecting, what? A visit from her nanny? A neighbor? Certainly not the mother-in-law they tried to erase. She blinked. "Mom?" Her voice cracked on the word, maybe from guilt, maybe from fear. But I didn't give her time to choose which. "Is Brad home?" I asked, flat as glass. She stammered something about him being at work, but it didn't matter. I wasn't here for conversation. I reached into my bag and pulled out the thick white envelope. I held it between us, her eyes locked on the name stamped across the front. Bradley Grayson and Shannon Grayson. Formal, legal, I made sure of that. "This is from my lawyer," I said, "and from me." She didn't take it at first. Her hands didn't move. Her painted nails curled slightly into her palm. "Mom, I think there's a misunderstanding." "No," I said, steady. "You understood perfectly. You just thought I wouldn't." She reached for the envelope with a tremble in her fingers. For a moment, I saw her as she used to be. The shy girl Brad brought home from college. Nervous, sweet, eager to impress. But now she was the woman who stood over my jewelry box while I lay intubated in a hospital bed. The woman who told real estate agents I was mentally unfit. The woman who cataloged my things like I was already rotting. Brad said she started again, but I cut her off. I know what Brad said, and I know what you did. You walked into my house with a smile and a storage bin. You let him tell the world I was finished, and you smiled through it. I took a step closer, holding her gaze. I wanted her to see me, not the woman they'd written off, but the one standing tall, very much alive, and holding the torch that was about to set their fantasy on fire. This letter explains everything, I continued. The trust, the fraud, the charges we're filing. The sale you tried to force through has been canceled. The bank accounts are frozen. And your names, both of them, are now under criminal review. Her face went white, the kind of white that doesn't blush, the kind that means blood is fleeing. I should have felt triumphant, but I didn't. I felt righteous, because this wasn't just revenge. This was justice. She tried to step aside. You can come in. No, I said. I'm not stepping into a house where the rug's already been pulled out from under me once. I turned and walked away, slow and sure, down the polished front steps they likely planned to replace with modern tiling, after gutting me. Behind me, I heard the door close. Not slam, not gently, just close, like a book they'd written the ending to. But the story wasn't over. Brad would come home to the envelope and realize the empire he built on fraud was made of sand. And I had just kicked over the first wall. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of my bed, not the one in my real bedroom, but the guest bed in Evelyn's spare room, where I'd been staying since the hospital. My own house didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt like a crime scene, and in a way, it was. The digital clock glowed 2:37 a.m., but I couldn't shut my eyes. Every time I tried, my mind walked through empty rooms where my life used to be. A china cabinet that held my mother's wedding dishes, gone. A drawer where I kept the letters Harold wrote me while he was stationed overseas, rifled through. My old slippers, the pink ones flattened from years of wear, even those were missing. They didn't just rob me, they dismantled me, piece by piece, frame by frame. Every object they touched wasn't just a possession, it was a memory, a moment, a life lived. And they threw it all into boxes like they were clearing out a motel room after checkout. That's what finally broke me. Not the money, not even the house. It was realizing that the people I made, the people I gave my body and blood to, looked at my life and saw scrap. They didn't grieve me. They planned around me. Prepared like my death was a business transaction. Brad used to bring me dandelions when he was 5. I kept one of them in a book. Flattened, yellow, sweet. I still had it. Until now. He once wept in my arms when his heart got broken in high school, sobbing that he'd never find love again. I was the first person he called when Elsie was born. I held her before even Shannon's mother. And now, he forged my name, filed documents that labeled me incompetent. And Shannon, God help me, I once believed she loved me. In her own quiet way. But quiet turned to compliant, and compliant turned to complicit. She was in the photos, smiling on my porch. She posted them with captions like, "New beginnings." New beginnings built on my grave. That's when I realized they weren't just waiting for me to die. They were trying to erase me before I had the chance to fight, to scrub my name from the deeds, the accounts, the memories, to write a version of my life that ended with them triumphant and me irrelevant. But I am not irrelevant. And I am not erased. I walked to the window, watching Evelyn's garden glow in the moonlight. My reflection stared back at me in the glass. Tired, yes. A little bent, but not broken. You raised them better, I whispered to myself. But maybe I didn't. Maybe I raised them with too much comfort, too much forgiveness, too many second chances. Well, they used their last one. I walked back to the table and pulled out the thick envelope Howard had given me, the one with the fraud charges, the court filings, the bank transfer records. I ran my hand over it. This wasn't about reclaiming property anymore. It was about rewriting the ending. They wrote me out of their version of the story. But I wasn't finished. "You wanted an inheritance," I said to the silence. "You'll get one, a legacy of disgrace." The courthouse steps were warm under my shoes. Mid-morning sun, just enough breeze to carry the smell of fresh-cut grass and stale legal paper. I stood there for a moment, not out of hesitation, out of reverence. Because this wasn't just paperwork. This was war. Howard walked beside me, briefcase in hand, calm as ever. But even he had to clear his throat before speaking. "Once this is filed, Helen, there's no undoing it." "Good," I said. And I meant it. We stepped inside. Air-conditioned, clinical, buzzing with quiet tension. I passed a woman in tears in the hallway, a man shouting into a phone, a child clinging to his mother's leg. People come to courthouses for one of two things: freedom or justice. I was there for both. We filed in the office of the clerk. The papers were thick, over 40 pages of documented betrayal, fraud, forgery, elder financial exploitation, unauthorized access to protected trust assets. Every exhibit was numbered, every screenshot labeled, every photo time-stamped. I had photos of the empty drawers, the missing jewelry, the cataloged items Shannon labeled for sale. I had Brad's email to the real estate agent, referring to the house as ours now. I had the forged power of attorney, notarized by a man we later discovered was a friend of a friend Brad played golf with. Sloppy, greedy, arrogant. Howard handed over the file with gloves on. Figuratively, of course. But make no mistake, this wasn't a gentle process. This was surgical. The clerk's stamp echoed loud in the quiet room. Final, cold, beautiful. I didn't feel guilty. They had gambled everything on me dying quietly. They had counted on it. And now they were going to choke on the paper trail they left behind. Back in Evelyn's car, I sat with the receipt in my lap. Not money, not material, proof that I still existed, that I mattered, that I was not the invisible mother they tried to write out of the script. Later that day, we went to the bank. The branch manager had already reviewed the evidence. She agreed to freeze the accounts Brad had tried transferring money from, including one he claimed was joint. It wasn't. It was mine. His name was never on it, she said, grimacing. He used your online credentials. Good, I said. Let it sit. Let him try to buy gas next week and get declined. I wasn't interested in politeness anymore, not in grace. Brad always smirked when he got away with something, always thought charm and swagger would shield him. But now, he'd be served by someone in a uniform, in front of neighbors. Shannon, too. She'd cry, maybe, pretend she didn't know, but her handwriting was on the item tags. Her voice was in the social media videos. Her face was in the listing photo, standing proudly on my deck. And soon, her name would be on the docket too, because I wasn't just filing charges. I was reclaiming power. For every mother who gave too much, for every widow treated like expired property, for every elder labeled a burden when they were still the spine of the family. They loved my money more than me, I whispered. But now they'd lose both. It was a Wednesday. Clear skies. Normal traffic. Just another weekday in a life Brad still thought he owned. He marched into the notary's office like a man going to cash a check, shoulders squared, phone in one hand, car keys in the other. Probably still smug from the sale he thought he pushed through, probably planning dinner reservations with stolen money. He had no idea he was walking into his own undoing. I was already there, in the lobby, quiet, unnoticed. I sat just behind a rack of business brochures. I didn't need to say a word. Not yet. He stormed up to the front desk. "Hi, yeah, I need clarification on something," he said, flashing the grin that once got him out of speeding tickets and into investors' wallets. "There's been a mistake on some documents regarding the Grayson Beach property." The receptionist looked up. I watched her eyes change, the way people's eyes do when they're told to be polite to a man they already know is lying. "Name?" she asked coolly. "Bradley Grayson. I was listed as power of attorney. I filed a deed transfer last month. One moment. She disappeared into the back room. I leaned forward in my chair, heart steady, fingers calm. Evelyn's voice echoed in my mind. You don't owe him anger, just consequence. A moment later, the notary herself returned. She was middle-aged, stern-faced, no nonsense. The kind of woman who smells trouble before it speaks. She held a manila folder in her hand. Mr. Grayson, she said evenly, we've reviewed the file you're referencing. We were contacted by Miss Helen Grayson's attorney last week. Brad's smile twitched. Right, yeah, that's my mother. We just need to clear this up. There is nothing to clear up, she said. Then she opened the folder. At the time you submitted the deed transfer, your mother was not the legal owner of the property. It was placed into a protected trust 2 months prior. The silence that followed tasted like justice. I watched his face, the shift from confusion to irritation to something darker. That tight little smirk faltered. I had power of attorney, he said, louder now. That's a legally binding document. The notary didn't flinch. It was forged. Brad blinked, swallowed. Excuse me? Forged, she repeated. We've compared signatures, dates, and verified that your mother never signed or authorized the document. In fact, the notary seal on the version you submitted is fraudulent as well. That, Mr. Grayson, is a felony. You could hear the breath drain out of him. I stood then, slowly, deliberately. He turned, startled, his eyes darting to me like a trapped animal spotting the hunter it didn't expect. Hi, sweetheart, I said, voice low. You forgot one thing while digging my grave. I wasn't in it. He didn't speak, just stood there, pale, sweating, the truth landing like bricks on his chest. The notary cleared her throat. Mr. Grayson, we will be submitting a report to the district attorney's office. You will be contacted soon. I walked past him as the papers were returned to the desk, each one now a receipt for his downfall. Brad hadn't just lost the house. He'd lost the illusion that he was ever in control. Let him squirm. Let him lie. Let him cry when the subpoenas come. I will not lift a hand to stop it. Because I built a life worth protecting, and he tried to steal it for sport. Now, he'll pay in full. I dressed with care that morning, not out of vanity, out of defiance. The same pearl necklace Brad had tried to pawn off, the same navy blazer Shannon once rolled her eyes at, saying it looked too old ladyish. I wore it proudly. Regal, quiet, unshaken. Let them look at me and remember who I am. I walked into the courthouse and sat in the front row. Not a corner, not hidden, right there in the light, where victims belong when they survive. Shannon entered first, eyes downcast, lips pressed thin. Her hair was pulled back, severe, like she thought dressing plainly would buy her mercy. It wouldn't. Brad swaggered in a few minutes later, slower than usual. The puffed chest was gone. The courtroom doesn't care about charm. The courtroom doesn't care how many Facebook followers you have. The courtroom only listens to facts. When the clerk read the charges aloud, my hands didn't tremble. Attempted estate fraud, forgery of legal documents, elder financial exploitation, unlawful transfer of protected assets. Each count echoed through the room like bells tolling for a funeral. Their lawyer tried to argue they acted under the belief that Mrs. Grayson was no longer competent to manage her affairs, but my doctor's testimony said otherwise. So did the video Evelyn recorded. Me signing trust documents, speaking clearly, remembering every detail, cracking a joke about Brad's poor landscaping skills. Then came the bank statements, the forged notary seal, the catalog of missing items, the neighbor's affidavit. She'd seen Brad carrying out my flat screen 2 days after my surgery. And the most damning, Shannon's messages to a friend, bragging about how soon it'll all be ours. The judge didn't speak for a long time after closing arguments. She just looked at Brad, then Shannon, then me. This was not a misunderstanding, she finally said. This was greed, clothed in premeditated betrayal. It was criminal, and it was cruel. Shannon wept, but not the way a daughter cries when she's sorry, the way a criminal cries when she's caught. Brad's jaw clenched. That same clenched jaw I saw when he was 8 and got grounded for lying. Only this time, it wasn't a week without TV. It was 3 years. Bradley Grayson, the judge said, you are sentenced to 3 years in state prison and ordered to pay $400,000 in restitution. Shannon Grayson, you are sentenced to 2 years and ordered to pay $250,000 restitution. That word rolled off the judge's tongue like justice with teeth. I didn't cry, I didn't clap. I just looked at them, my son, my daughter-in-law, and let them see what they really lost. It wasn't the house. It wasn't the money. It was me, the mother who would have given them everything, the matriarch who endured, forgave, cooked, prayed, and tucked them into safety every time they fell. They buried that woman, and in her place, I rose. I didn't just survive their betrayal, I turned it into a verdict. As they were led out in handcuffs, Brad glanced back one last time. I didn't flinch. Because forgiveness? That comes later. This was justice. What would you have done if your own children sold the house before the heartbeat flatlined? Did Helen go far enough, or would you have shown mercy? Tell us where you're watching from in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell so you never miss the next story. Because sometimes revenge isn't just sweet, it's estate planned.